Tehran this morning woke up to skies that were both orange and gray all at once as its fuel depots were hit with the West Asia war spiraling. I'm Barkha, you're with the Mojo story. Both sides of the war have released dramatic footage, ballistic missiles flying across the skyline. Iran saying that its fuel depots have been hit, but also releasing footage of ballistic missiles that it has fired in the direction of Israel. The Americans are now talking about a war that could last a minimum of 5 weeks. But the world is worried. What might that do to oil prices that are already surging at $100 per barrel? What might that do to global aviation, to global commerce, to global trade? This as Iran chooses a new supreme leader, the son of Ayatollah Khamenei, Mojtaba Khamenei. Can he survive? Can he survive? Because remember, the Americans have made it clear that everybody is a fair target and everybody is fair game. In the midst of all of this, it is the Gulf countries that have been pulled into the heart of this battle. And there are ordinary lives of ordinary citizens at stake. For example, the Iranian team that you see on your screen, the girls who must go back to Iran after they refuse to sing the anthem, people now worried about their safety. The girls' school in Iran, there is now verified evidence that it was indeed a US Tomahawk missile that hit the school in Minab. Desalination plants are now fair game. Both sides are making allegations that the other has targeted desalination plants. So the human cost of this war is getting graver and graver by the day. Trump has to confront popular opinion with midterms coming up. And if oil prices continue the way they are, can he really afford to extend this war for 5 weeks, maybe even longer? India, in the meantime, has officially spelled out our position. Foreign Minister Jaishankar spoke in Parliament earlier today. He spoke about how India is in touch with both sides, but added that it was tough to get in touch sometimes with the Iranian leadership. He also spoke about India's decision to offer refuge to an Iranian warship. This in the light of the fact that the Americans sunk IRIS Dina, an Iranian warship that was heading back home after being part of naval exercises here in India. Let me go across to our two very distinguished experts today as we try and understand what might happen next and what the consequences are for us in different parts of the world. I first want to welcome Professor C. Rajamohan, one of India's foremost strategic affair thinkers and authors. It's always a pleasure, Raja. And joining us from Singapore today is one of the world's foremost experts on the Middle East, what we in India call West Asia, James Dorsey, a journalist and academic, is here with us as well. James, let me start with you. A whole bunch of things have happened together. We have Trump and the administration in America talking about preparing for a war that could last up to 5 weeks. Trump, for the moment, doesn't even seem to be paying attention to surging oil prices. The White House is even talking about how a compulsory draft could be on the table if the need arises, saying the president keeps all options open. In parallel, you now have independent verification from multiple media organizations that it was indeed an American missile that hit a girls' school in Iran. Not a great look for the Americans. Donald Trump continues to deny it was them. What is your take if you had to just assess where both sides stand right now with Iran having a new supreme leader? How would you look at it?
I think that we're basically in for a long stretch. The appointment of Mojtaba Khamenei as the new supreme leader is an open question. The jury is out on him. There is no doubt that what the government wanted to project is defiance, given that the United States, Trump, was insisting on intervening in the appointment of the new supreme leader and declared Mojtaba unacceptable, but also to signal resilience, which they have, resistance, unity, and cohesion of the regime, which so far they have maintained. So in the short term, with other words, when Mojtaba addresses the nation for the first time at some point, we're going to hear that hard line reverberate. But that really doesn't mean all that much. There's no doubt that this is for the regime a fight for survival. if the regime survives this onslaught, doesn't matter if Mojtaba is assassinated or not, but if the regime as such survives, that is victory. On the other hand, Mojtaba is someone who's very well connected with the clerical class, with the intelligence, with the security, with the military, including the Islamic Revolutionary Guard. He's a younger generation. This is a generational shift. And by and large, what we're seeing among that new generation, that upcoming generation, is that on the one hand, they're loyal to the Islamic Republic, but they're also pragmatists. So in many ways, if someone can open a door to end this conflict and to negotiate with the United States, negotiate in the traditional sense of the word, not in Trump's sense of the word, then that is Mojtaba Khamenei.
Yeah. But before I go to Raja James, a follow up on that, you said it doesn't matter if he's assassinated or not. If the Americans have made up their mind that they're going to basically take out, every successive person who takes over Iran's regime till they have somebody that they like, then can Mujtaba last long enough? It's a cruel question. Can he live long enough to bring his pragmatism to the situation? James?
In fact, there's no question that he's a man with a target on his back. But having said that, sure, you can have a continuation where the Israelis, the Americans take out successive leaderships. Let me remind you of two things. In 1979, 1980, and I was in Iran at the time, you had, I forget now whether it was 2 presidents and 3 prime ministers or 3 prime ministers and 2 presidents assassinated within a period of months. You had a huge bomb blast that took out 72 members of parliament, including some of the most prominent clerics in the country, like Ayatollah Beheshti. We're 47 years later. The Islamic Republic is still there. In June of last year, the Israelis took out the military and security, including the IRGC leadership. They were replaced. The Israelis took them out again. These are still fighting units. So, yes, you can keep on taking out people, and somewhere that's going to be finite. But the record so far is that Iran has the resilience to withstand enormous blows.
Yeah. Raja, how do you look at it? If this carries on for a longish period, as James thinks it's going to, as almost everybody we're talking to now thinks it's going to, what does that mean for the Gulf countries? What does it mean for us in India? What does it mean for the geopolitical order? It's no coincidence that one of the first global leaders to congratulate Mojtaba Khamenei was Vladimir Putin today. Russia and China have so far stayed somewhat on the margins, though Russia is now being accused by the Americans of helping Iran. But, if this carries on any longer and there are consequences for global economy, you could see other countries getting more actively involved.
Absolutely. I think, Barkha, any war, I think one of the biggest effects of any war of this scale is on the domestic politics of the combatants. Now, James talked about the resilience of the Iranian leadership. The question is, if this pounding goes on for a few more weeks, does it hold together? Will there be groups within the system willing to engage? That we don't know how this will play out. In the case of US, you're already seeing some differences. For example, the US, I believe, has conveyed its unhappiness to Israel about the bombing of the oil depots. There are questions about how does the coordination go further. Meanwhile, within the US itself, the problem of domestic support, and we've always seen history in the US, strong support initially, but if the costs of that war begin to mount, there will be issues within the United States itself. And finally, on the problem between the Americans and the Arab allies, to the extent that Iran has sought to widen the war, it is also pushing the Gulf Arab countries towards the US. But still, I think the US has to maintain this coalition. Can they really do this in an effective way? Can Iran continue to fight as a resilient force? These issues get even more complicated for both sides. If the oil infrastructure is destroyed, if Iran's oil exports are contained, and if the oil prices continue to surge, it'll have an effect on the US economy. So I think we are heading into a situation which is far more consequential than what we saw in the case of Ukraine, because the Gulf, as we're beginning to recognize, is the very fulcrum of the global politics of energy, of connectivity through air travel, and money, investment flows. So I think a lot will get affected unless either side finds some way out, and unless there is some change on either side is what matters, I think, as we look ahead.
Let me ask both of you this. Raja, you mentioned that Iran targeting of cities like Dubai, Riyadh, countries like Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar may have pushed these countries actually towards the US and against Iran, so may have made them more strident. Do you therefore believe that Iran's targeting of these countries was a tactical error? I could argue it differently to you and say that it was the one card in an asymmetric warfare where they're not equal militarily to either the Americans or the Israelis, that they had to play, which was to remind these countries that have positioned themselves as hubs of commerce, oases, literally sort of metaphorical sort of oases within a stormy region. Basically, maybe their hope was that these countries would then push Trump to say, pause.
Exactly. I think for Iran, it was about raising the cost to the United States by putting pressure on the global economy by attacking the Gulf states. And for the US, I think it is a question of how does it hold the coalition under those circumstances. Here, I think the tragedy for the Gulf Arabs has been historically, ever since the Islamic Revolution in 1979. For them, Iran was a threat. Islamic Republic was a threat. They supported Saddam Hussein initially to counter Iran. Then you saw they creating all kinds of coalitions within. GCC was formed in response to the creation, in response to the Islamic Republic's formation. Then you saw the Gulf Arabs also opposing the US-Iran nuclear deal, basically saying, look, this will create problems for them, that Iran will be emboldened. So I think the Gulf Arabs are trapped between an unpredictable ally who might even make things worse, and an Islamic Republic that is actually could come out of this even stronger than it is in the sense that what it can do to the Arabs. So I think it's really, for them, it's a particularly tragic moment that they don't have the capabilities to defend themselves. Do they have the capacity to negotiate separate deal with Iran? That doesn't look either. So I think this is a big moment for them. What they do in this context, do they join the fight? Do they hold back? Do they restrain the United States, or eventually strengthen their own capabilities over the longer term to deal with the challenges?
James, what do you think? Do you believe that the Iran pulling the Gulf countries, the GCC, into this war is a mistake? Or do you think it was a battlefield smart move when the move was made?
Iran had a choice. The choice was either to be defensive, which would mean to try and counter US and Israeli attacks. Fact of the matter is, it does not have the military infrastructure to do so. And therefore, it only had one alternative, which was go on the offensive. There are no Iranian and Israeli targets in Iran. By definition, whatever offensive move the Iranians would take would be transnational and across borders. In addition to that, there is the factor which Raja mentioned, which is the Iranian strategy is to increase the price of this war, in the hope that the Gulf states and the American public will pressure Trump to relent. So it's a strategy that in some degrees is working. Raja is right that on the one hand, the Gulf states have no choice but to tighten their relationships with the United States. But on the other hand, there is a lot of sentiment in the Gulf states that is not only against Iran, but also feels that the United States has dragged them into a war that was not their war and not a war of their choice.
Why do you believe the Gulf countries cannot put pressure, James, on the Americans to look for an off-ramp? Their entire existence, future is rooted in this belief that they can be these hubs of global commerce. If this carries on, it is an existential problem for the Gulf countries, for cities like Dubai, for example?
I didn't say that they don't have the ability to pressure. They have the ability to pressure. Fact of the matter is that they exerted pressure uh, to avoid this war. They went out of their way to ensure that this war did not did not happen. What we've seen is the limits of their leverage. Trump ignored it. Now, that doesn't mean that they, going forward, will have no leverage. They may very well, particularly as the situation worsens, as we see the crisis in the oil and energy markets, and that reverberates into other markets. But so far, their leverage, their influence has been influential, despite the fact that Trump traveled last year to the Gulf, got a whopping $3.6 trillion in investment pledges. You would think that that would count for something.
Agreed. And to that extent, I think you're right that there's a limit to their leverage that's there for the world to see. And, Raja, the widely misreported or misunderstood apology by the Iranian president. Iran's president was reported to have apologized to neighbors to say, we won't be attacking you anymore. That's provided no attacks emanate from your countries against us. Now, it seems code for saying to these countries, stop allowing America to have military bases, military presence in these countries. Almost all of them do. To that extent, that apology was kind of meaningless or misunderstood.
Yeah, I think how we interpret this statement is one thing. There's one part of it was an apology, other part of it was a promise, whether conditional or otherwise, in terms of conditions under which the Iran would respond. But the fact is, it was violated pretty quickly. See, historically in the Islamic Republic, the presidents did not have much power over security policy. For that matter, even on foreign policy, they never had the freedom of action. The supreme leader was the ultimate arbiter. And then the IRGC and other forces were equally powerful. So I think one way of thinking about it is the government today is still settling down to a new norm and the new balance within. And it is not clear if the president has the authority to assert to a new policy. So I think those divisions will remain because you are fighting a war. Within that, what are the tactics you need to employ? That will always be there. And I think if the military pressure mounts, these divisions too could come. But at this point, as James said, they're united, and there is no give to the Arabs in terms of letting them off the hook. So I think that's the interpretation. I think at this point you can make. The president has always had. Remember, he came to UN. His approach has been generally one of conciliatory one, but I don't think the conditions exist. Whether we don't know whether he has enough support domestically to undertake a policy of less hostility to the neighbors and even open a door for the talks with the United States.
James, I want you to come in on the fact that America and Israel do not necessarily have identical positions on this war. So even someone as extreme as Lindsey Graham, for example, has criticized Israel's targeting of fuel depots in Tehran, saying, don't do this. There are sections of the MAGA base, prominent voices, for example, like Megyn Kelly, the news anchor, who otherwise is a big Trump devotee, who's saying, why are we fighting Israel's war? At some point, do you see that divergence becoming a problem for Trump?
It depends on how this develops. First of all, it's not just Lindsey Graham who's upset about the attacks on the oil facilities. If you look at the last 9 days, Iranian oil facilities were spared, and they were deliberately spared. This was an Israeli action that the Americans did not like. Going forward, essentially, Trump will need a victory of some kind, whether that's a negotiation on the enrichment issue of nuclear of uranium, whether that's something on the other issues that Trump has, ballistic missiles, relationships with non-state allies. Once he has that, he's going to pull out of this. Israel wants regime change by definition. And so you could actually get a situation where Israel continues this war, but the United States doesn't. keep one thing in mind. On Saturday, the first day of the U.S.-Israeli attack, in the first hours of that attack, the supreme leader was killed. Trump had an option there. He could have declared victory and said,
Exactly.
we've killed the leader. We've opened the door to change. You, the Iranian people, have now a historic opportunity. You should grab it. The Israelis would not have gone along with that. Now the question is, would Trump have put his foot down? Probably not. So that relationship between Israel and the United States is a very complex relationship. It's not that the Israelis dictate U.S. policy, but they have significant influence. The last thing I want to say on this, keep in mind that the United States has its own long-standing fish to fry with Iran. Go back to the 1979 occupation of the U.S. Embassy for 444 days. The role of Iran in the war in Iraq with the IEDs, the improvised explosive devices that were devastating. So the Americans have a long list of grievances of their own.
And that is true. And, therefore, even this disquiet and outrage, frankly, around a US missile striking a girls' school, Raja, in Iran, has not created the kind of defensiveness that you would expect in the American establishment. I just want to play out, actually, Trump's response to this. He was asked about this, and he basically said the Iranians did this to themselves. Take a look.
Based on what I've seen, that was done by Iran.
Is that true, Mr. Exum? It was Iran who did that?
We're certainly investigating.
Still
But
investigating.
the only side that targets civilians is Iran. We think it was done. We think it was done by Iran because they're very inaccurate, as you know, with their munitions. They have no accuracy whatsoever. It was done by Iran.
Raja, the fact is that there are not just the New York Times and Reuters, but we have new footage today that actually shows a Tomahawk missile hitting the girls' school. It's been verified by other media outlets. This seems to be. I'm not saying that this was deliberately done. There was a naval base next to this girls' school, from what we understand. But the fact is that it is most likely a US missile that has struck this girls' school, creating unspeakable tragedy. We've seen those images of the mass funerals there. It's harrowing. But look at Trump's response. These are the mass graves, and it's difficult to watch this. And yet Trump's response is to go on the offensive, despite widespread reporting that this lays at the door of the Americans.
Look, I think externally in the rest of the world, I think this incident and the fact that American media itself is pointing out that Trump's claims are not valid, the evidence points to the US bombing. I think this is going to degrade the legitimacy of the US operation across the regions of the world, because they see this as clearly a tragic attack that was part of the US war against Iran. But it is unlikely. I think the reality is that this is not going to change the course immediately in the US. What will change the course in the US is really when the US feels the pain of the war, not the pain of the Iranian people. Therefore, I think we've talked about it earlier, oil prices, whether it looks like a quagmire, it's only then that you will see the domestic opposition coming. But this incident alone is unlikely to make a difference to US strategy or US policy. But for the rest of the world, it's a confirmation, I think, to say that this war is not a legitimate one.
Yeah. James, do you see it like that? Do you think that while the Americans have a long list, as you said, of grievances with Iran, the fact is that there are a couple of things that have actually cost the Americans the narrative perception. The girls' school bombing tops the list. But for us here in India, there has been a lot of disquiet in the country over the American decision to bomb a US ship as it was heading back from a ceremonial fleet review, a naval exercise. They were here as the guests of India. Our president reviewed them. Those soldiers, they were young cadets marching in Indian cities. I think it has disturbed India enormously to see what happened to that ship. So these two incidents taken together, do you agree with Raja that the credibility of the American action has been severely dented?
I think there's a more fundamental way of approaching this. But before we do that, let me just add something to what Raja said about the US domestic scene. I think there are two things that are beyond what Raja mentioned that are going to be crucial in shifting US public opinion or mobilizing US public opinion. One is body bags. We've already seen 8 body bags.
Yeah.
And if that number starts to increase, particularly if it increases starkly, that's going to be a major factor. The second factor is boots on the ground. If the United States puts boots on the ground, the Congress has to declare war. So far, the Congress has avoided the word war, and the United States and Trump has used it, but that still doesn't make the United States being legally at war. More fundamentally to all of this, I think, and that goes to the issue of the incident with the Iranian frigate, is that essentially Trump has not only changed US foreign policy, he has changed international diplomacy. In other words, US foreign policy today is might makes right. And you use hopefully only a display of military force, but if need be, military force to impose, to cajole, to bully people to submit to your demands. He's changed international diplomacy in the sense that it's all about Trump. Do you want to get on the bad side of Trump? Do you want to earn brownie points with Trump? It's all very cautious maneuvering of Trump. And I think that what you saw with the discussion about the Iranian frigate in the economic exclusion zone of Sri Lanka fits into that pattern. Trump feels the United States can do what it wants because it is the United States, because it has the greatest military in the world and is God's gift to the earth.
Yeah. And that has generated debates in almost every country around the world. Indonesia left the so-called peace board of Trump. In India, we've had a robust debate over what should be our response to this war in West Asia. Foreign Minister Jaishankar Raja spoke in Parliament today, spelling out India's position. I just want to play out that clip and come to both of you for last comments. Take a look.
Insofar as the United States is concerned, we have maintained regular contacts through diplomatic channels. While attempts have been made, contacts with Iran at the leadership level are obviously difficult at this time. I have, however, spoken to Foreign Minister Arakchi on 28 February and 5 March 2026. We will continue these high-level conversations in the coming days. So, the House will also be interested in the issue of an Iranian vessel that is currently docked in Kochi. The Iranian side had requested permission on 28 February for 3 ships in the region to dock at our ports. This was accorded on 1 March. IRIS Lavan actually docked on 4th March in Kochi. The crew is currently in Indian naval facilities. We believe that this was the right thing to do, and the Iranian foreign minister has expressed his country's thanks for this humane gesture.
Raja Mohan, if I may come to you first on the downing, the sinking of these ships. It caused a great deal of disquiet, as you know, in India. What did you make of Jaishankar's statement? I was struck by the fact that he said that 3 Iranian ships asked for refuge. He didn't name the ships, so we actually don't know whether IRIS Dana was among them. That's the ship that was sunk. We know that 1 ship has been given refuge in Sri Lanka. We know that 1 ship has been given refuge in India. And presumably the 3rd ship is the one that was sunk by the US sub. What's important is he said the refuge was given within a day of it being asked. They asked for it on 28th February. On the 1st March, India agreed to this. India has been a accused by some critics at home and abroad of being soft on the Israelis, primarily because of Prime Minister Modi's trip just on the eve of these strikes. How do you see India's response? In the last few days, I think we've seen a lot of subtle messaging that we are not taking sides on this. We are calling for peace. You've seen the Foreign Secretary signing the condolence book at the Iranian embassy in India. You've seen Prime Minister Modi saying military conflicts are no solution. What do you make of India's response?
Look, I think setting aside the sinking of the ship by the American Navy, it's not clear where exactly the three ships were, because the other two were closer to Sri Lanka, and one of them came into Sri Lankan port, while this was obviously somewhere closer to Kochi, and that's how they managed to get into Kochi. But the bigger question, I think, is what you asked about: where does India stand? I think when you read Mr. Jaishankar's statement today, there are two parts to it. I mean, one saying we want dialogue, peace, engagement between the countries, and that our endeavor would be to support those kind of processes. Though for me, as a realist, I would say at this point, I don't know how much of an influence that outsiders can bring to bear on the actions of Iran, Arabs, and the United States. But I think what is also, I think, hinted there is the fact that India's interests with the Gulf Arabs are today so predominant. So this notion of taking sides between Iran and, say, Gulf Arabs, because there are two parts to the conflict as well. One is the US-Iran contradiction. Other is the contradiction since the revolution between a revolutionary Iran and the conservative Gulf kingdoms. And I think on that, if you see last 45, 50 years, our relationship with the Gulf Arabs have dramatically grown. $200 billion of trade, 10 million Indians there, the remittances, the whole range of connectivity that exists with the Gulf Arabs. In contrast, because of Iran's isolation, there's not much of economic cooperation, barring small things like maybe a port here, a port there. So I think the economic weight, the diaspora weight today is fully with the Arabs. So my sense is that India, when he said, when Jaishankar, if you read the last sentence of the statement, where he says, look, our national interests are paramount. But while he did not say our interests in the Gulf are above those of Iran, but that's a reality. That the notion that India would be absolutely, equal between the two sides, I think would be unrealistic. I also want to mention one other thing. When India changed the territorial status quo of Kashmir in 2019, August, the UAE was one of the few countries that supported India. If you recall, the UAE also got Indian Foreign Minister at that time, late Sushma Swaraj, to speak a meeting of the OIC Organization of Islamic Conference. So you have actually a relationship with the UAE, which is one of the vulnerable countries today. And I think the statement reflects that our stakes with the Arabs are so high that we're not going to treat this as some kind of a neutral issue.
I agree with you, but all I would say to you before I give James the last word is that for the Gulf, it is paramount that this war ends. And I think when I talk about neutral, I don't mean that Iran is as critical to India's interests as the Gulf is. Clearly, there's no doubt that the Gulf is much more critical to India's interests right now, where we stand today, but that it is in the interest of the Gulf for this war to end.
It's also in our interest, because it is going to affect oil prices, will affect you.
Yes.
If the diaspora, you got to airlift 10 million people is never going to be done. The costs are very, very damaging to us. But the fact is, your leverage on shaping, if you want to feel good and issue a statement, which is what the first part of Jaishankar's statement says, yeah, we are for dialogue, for peace, we're against violence. But that's fine. I mean, that's what diplomats do. But your real leverage over this conflict is limited. So the question is, how do you protect your interests? What do you signal to your friends in the Gulf Arabs? And I think that's what has taken precedence over the broader question of forming language about what kind of declaration will you give.
Yeah, that's absolutely fair. James, let me give you the last word. I have two questions for you. One, you opened by saying that we're in for a long stretch. Iran clearly wants to indicate defiance, resilience, inflict cost on other countries for the pain it is going through. But A, does it have the capacity? B, do you think that if this carries on, other countries are going to step in? Do you see a role for Russia and China here, throwing a more active weight behind Iran?
First of all, let's face it, we're 9 days into the war, and Iran has shown that it has capacity. It has attacked oil facilities, crucial oil facilities. It's attacked a desalination plant in Bahrain, leave alone the attacks on U.S. bases, the disruption of air traffic, hotels, residence blocks, airports. So they've shown capacity. The question is how long they will be able to do that. I think that's anybody's guess. I would be cautious with all kinds of estimates because we're in the we don't only have a kinetic war on the ground, we have an information war going on too. I mean, I think that as a matter of principle, the Russians and the Chinese are going to be limited with what they can do. They're not going to put boots on the ground to save the Iranian regime. Neither likes Iran that much. In addition to which, they've got other fish to fry. They are going to give Iran diplomatic cover. There's no question about it. In the Security Council and other international fora, they may help the Iranians with components that they need, bits and pieces here and there, but that's as far as it goes. And neither China nor Russia has the influence to try and mediate or stop this war.
And therefore, you said Trump needs a victory. And you're absolutely right in saying the killing of Khamenei could have looked like or been claimed as a victory. He didn't claim it as that. What could today look like a victory to Trump? What could today give Trump an opportunity to say we've done what we needed to and we're out of here?
I think the problem is that Trump doesn't have a realistic perspective. If you go back to the week before the war with Iran, Steve Witkoff, his special envoy, went on television to say that Trump was curious. He didn't understand, and this is the exact phrase that he used, he didn't understand that Iran had not capitulated. He expected Iran to capitulate. That for him is victory. And so now he's boxed himself into a very difficult position, particularly because the Iranians are not going to hand it to him on a silver platter.
Yeah, absolutely. Many questions, few answers at this point. We're in an extremely volatile time. I will leave it there. Two fine scholars who have spent years looking at foreign policy. James in particular has spent a lifetime looking at the Middle East. Raja, you have, of course, devoted years and years looking at foreign policy. I thank both of you for helping us understand what's going on. I think it's in everybody's interest that this war ends sooner rather than later. But Trump, as was just said, needs an exit strategy, an off-ramp that doesn't seem visible at this point in the conflict. Thank you, James Dorsey, Professor C. Raja Mohan. It's been a pleasure. Thank you and see you soon. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.